I hadn't spoken to Father John in over 15 years, not since that night. So when the envelope arrived, handwritten, postmarked from Ashwood, Virginia, I felt a chill run straight down my spine. No return address, just my name in shaky cursive. I held it for hours before opening it. Something in me already knew this wasn't going to be a friendly catch-up. Inside was a letter, one page, faded, smudged with fingerprints, and something else, something darker at the corners. Blood? Dirt? I couldn't tell. Michael, asterisk if you're reading this, then something has happened. The church is no longer safe. They're trying to hide it again, but it's too late this time. I've left the key in the old organ, just like we planned. Come to Ashwood. Come alone. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, stay out of the basement. J asterisk. At first, I thought it was a prank. A cruel joke dredged up from our past. But then I saw the symbol at the bottom of the page. A crude sketch of an inverted cross with 3 vertical slashes beside it. I hadn't seen that mark since 2008, since the night we broke into the abandoned rectory and found. Well, we never really agreed on what we found, but something had been there, and something had followed me home. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I told my boss I needed a break, left my phone at home, and drove 12 hours through the Blue Ridge Mountains, deeper and deeper into nowhere. Ashwood wasn't on most maps anymore. It was one of those towns that disappear between censuses, left to rot with the coal mines and forgotten people. But as I crossed the crumbling bridge into town, everything felt too familiar. The crooked gas station, the rusted diner, and there, looming above the tree line like a forgotten sentinel, St. Luke's Church. Same rotting steeple, same broken bell, same graveyard full of names no one remembered. I parked at the foot of the hill and stared up at it. My breath fogged the glass. The road up to the church was blocked by a chain, but the lock had already been cut. Someone wanted me to come, and despite every warning bell screaming in my head, I started walking. The wind carried something strange that day, a low hum, like voices trapped beneath the soil. Halfway up the hill, I passed the old cemetery. The gate hung open. I paused. A new grave had been dug. Fresh dirt, no headstone, no name, just a wooden cross jammed into the earth, wrapped with black rosary beads. Suddenly, the church bell rang. It shouldn't have. That bell hadn't worked in decades. I arrived in Ashwood just past 6 p.m. The sun dipped behind the mountains like it was trying to hide. The town looked even worse than I remembered. Empty houses with sagging porches, windows covered with sheets or not at all, paint peeling like old skin. It wasn't abandoned, not entirely. A few faces peered at me through cracked blinds as I passed. But no one waved, no one smiled. They knew why I was here. I checked into the only motel still running, the Ashwood, and looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 1980s. The clerk didn't ask for ID. He just handed me a rusted key and muttered, "You here for the church?" I hesitated. "Excuse me." He didn't look up from his crossword. Doesn't matter. Room 7. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the bell, distant, distorted, like it was underwater. At one point, around 3 a.m., I swear I heard someone whispering outside my window. When I looked, there was no one there. But the glass had fogged up from the outside, and in the center was a single handprint. In the morning, I went to the Ashwood Public Records office, hoping to find anything about Father John's whereabouts. The building was tucked between an old pharmacy and a boarded-up bar. It smelled like mildew and something older. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a crucifix necklace. When I asked about the church, she stiffened. St. Luke's was decommissioned in 1995, she said. We don't hold records for it anymore. I leaned closer. I'm looking for someone. Father John Keller. He used to work there. He sent me a letter. She stood up suddenly. You should leave, Mr. Walker. That church isn't a place for outsiders. How do you know my name? I asked. She paused. It's on the motel ledger. This town talks fast. Then she leaned in. If he wrote you, it means he's already gone. That church takes things. People. It doesn't give them back. I left with more questions than answers. But there was one clue. The organ. He said he'd left a key in it. The climb back up to St. Luke's felt heavier the second time, like the very hill resisted me. The trees were bare, branches stretched like skeletal fingers toward the sky, and the bell tower loomed, casting a shadow even in the gray daylight. The front doors of the church were unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Pews sat in jagged rows, broken and warped by time. Dust clung to every surface, and something darker stained the floor near the altar. The stained glass windows had all been shattered, replaced with mismatched boards and yellowing plastic sheets. But the organ was still there. It sat in the back, half covered by a moth-eaten cloth. I peeled it away and ran my fingers along the keys. They didn't play, only gave off hollow clicks, like old bones cracking. Then I opened the small panel beneath the keyboard, and there it was, a tarnished brass key, wrapped in a strip of paper. I unrolled the note. It was in John's handwriting. The basement door, behind the pulpit. Don't go down there unless you're ready to see it again. It knows you're back. I looked toward the altar. Behind it was a set of steps that curved downward into darkness, hidden by a crimson curtain. Something moved behind it. Not fast, not loud, just wrong. A slow shift in the shadows that didn't match any wind or animal. I backed away and left the church. I told myself I was going to come back later, better prepared. But in truth, I was terrified. At the bottom of the hill, I saw someone standing in the cemetery. A man in black, back turned to me, head slightly tilted as if listening. I called out. He didn't move. I blinked and he was gone. That night, I listened to the tape. The one I kept from the night in 2008. It was part of the reason John and I never spoke again. We had brought a camcorder into the church, back when it was already long condemned. Something happened with the audio. We had captured something. At the 32-minute mark, right after the footage cuts to black, there's a voice. Raspy, guttural. It whispers one word, over and over. Michael, Michael, Michael. I returned to the Ashwood Public Records the next morning, this time determined not to leave empty-handed. The old clerk wasn't there. A younger man, maybe in his 30s, with thin glasses and a nervous twitch in his jaw, sat behind the counter. I need the archive files on St. Luke's Church, I said flatly. He hesitated. That building is off limits. I have a letter from Father John Keller. I believe he's in danger or worse. That changed something in his eyes. He looked over his shoulder, then waved me behind the counter. Come with me, he said quietly. He led me down a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets, all dusty and neglected. At the end was a steel door with a faded label, Restricted Church Records. Inside, there was a maze of old documents, yellow papers and brittle folders. He pulled one from the middle of a stack marked St. Luke's 1973 to 1994. Make it quick, he said, then closed the door behind me. The records told a story darker than I imagined. There had been 29 disappearances in the area between 1973 and 1993. Most were children. All had one thing in common. They or their families attended St. Luke's. The church had buried it all under vague explanations, runaways, accidents, misfiled reports. But one note stood out, handwritten and barely legible. The choir hears it. They always hear it first. Then I found the original blueprints of the church. What caught my eye was a marked section that didn't match the modern floor plan. A sealed-off room beneath the basement, marked simply Cryptus Dei, the crypt of God, and someone had scribbled in red ink beside it, built over it, bound it, but it listened still. Suddenly, the lights in the archive flickered. I turned around. There, in the narrow hall outside the archive room, stood the same figure from the cemetery. Closer now, the face didn't have features, just a smooth, pale blur. I blinked. He was gone. I ran. When I got outside, the clerk was gone too. And in my hand, I don't know how it got there, was another page clearly torn from the file. It had a photograph, a group of choir boys. In the center, a young me and John. Behind us, just visible in the shadows near the organ, was something that shouldn't have been there. Something tall, something with no eyes. I returned to the church just before midnight. The town was dead silent. Even the wind seemed to avoid the hill now. The flashlight in my hand flickered as I reached the doors of St. Luke's. They opened with a groan that echoed through the empty nave. I walked straight to the altar, pulling the crimson curtain aside. There they were, the stairs, narrow, stone, crumbling at the edges. The basement smelled of rot, old incense, and something metallic, like rust but sharper. At the bottom of the steps, I found a rusted iron door. The brass key from the organ fit perfectly. It clicked. I pushed it open. What lay beyond was not just a basement. It was a chamber, circular, ancient-looking. The stone was older than the church itself. On the far wall, symbols were etched, Latin phrases, some of which I recognized from the blueprint. Obligamus tibi menere. We bind you to remain. In the center of the room was a well, sealed with a wrought iron grate. Thick chains wrapped around it, bolted to the stone. It was cold, not just physically, but wrong. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones and whispered your name inside your skull. Suddenly, the grate rattled. I froze. Then, from the well, came a sound I hadn't heard in 17 years. The choir, dozens of children's voices, singing in unison, but warped slow, like a record playing backwards. Michael, do you remember? You opened the door once before. I turned to run, but standing in the exit was the figure again, closer than ever. He stepped into the dim light. No eyes, no mouth, but I could feel it smiling. Then I blacked out. I don't remember the next hour, maybe more. I woke up on the church floor, just passed on, dirt in my mouth. My hands were scratched and bloody. The door to the basement was shut, the key gone, but etched into the wooden pulpit, in deep gouges that hadn't been there before, was one sentence. You brought it back. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. The warped choir, the clink of chains in the dark, whispers in Latin crawling through my mind like maggots. I needed answers, not just stories or symbols. Proof. So I dug up the old High 8 camcorder tapes, the ones John and I recorded in 2008. I had forgotten about the backup tapes, copies we stored in a locked case in my parents' attic. I spent hours transferring them to digital. Most of the footage was shaky, mundane. Two stupid kids exploring an abandoned church. But near the end of one tape, just before the camcorder cut out, I found something new, something neither of us noticed back then. A frame-by-frame analysis revealed it, at timestamp 48 minutes and 12 seconds. As the camera pans across the altar, a black shape rises from the pulpit floor. It doesn't walk. It lifts as if being pulled by invisible wires. Tall, inhumanly thin. Then at 48 minutes and 14 seconds, 2 frames only, it turned to look into the lens. Its face was mine. I ran outside, breath fogging in the cold morning air. Something was wrong with time, with space. I didn't know it was real anymore. That's when the phone rang. A landline I hadn't used in years. I picked it up. Silence. Then a voice, raspy and dry like old leaves. You stood at the threshold, Michael. You sang in its house. And now it remembers you. I dropped the phone. The TV flickered on by itself. Static, then video feed. Not the one from my camera. A live feed of the church basement. Chains rattling. The grate trembling. Then the choir began to sing again. Louder this time. And in the middle of their chanting, just audible, came another voice. Help us, help us, help us. Children, dozens of them. Alive? That night, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, St. Luke's, you're not alone. Attachment, confession _ MOV. It was a video. John, sitting in a dark room, visibly older. Gaunt, eyes hollow. Michael, if you're seeing this, I'm gone. I couldn't outrun it. None of us could. It feeds on guilt, on memory, on song forgotten. And you were the last voice. Don't go back there. Not unless you plan to end it. For good. I had to go back. Not out of bravery, No, out of something worse. Guilt. John's words echoed in my skull. You were the last voice. So I packed only what I needed. Flashlight, camcorder, salt, and a priest manual I found in the church archives. On the back page, scribbled in trembling handwriting, was a phrase. Where voices rise, so must the truth descend. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. The sky bled gray as I climbed the hill again. St. Luke's tower rose like a finger accusing heaven. The door was ajar this time, as if it was expecting me. Inside, the pews were gone, replaced by rows of empty chairs, all turned to face the altar. On each chair, a single burnt hymnal. But it wasn't the nave that pulled me in this time. It was a choir loft. I ascended the creaking spiral staircase. Each step groaned like a cry. The air got colder the higher I climbed. At the top, nothing had changed, except everything. Dust hung like cobwebs in frozen air. Sheet music was scattered across the floor, pages yellowed, curling at the edges. The pipe organ loomed in the dark, still and massive. But as I stepped closer, the keys pressed themselves down. One by one, a melody began to play, slow, tragic, ancient. Then voices, dozens of them, children, Kyrie eleison, Chrysalinon, the language of the dead, the mass of the lost. And there, behind the pipes, a door, one I swear wasn't there before. I opened it. Behind the organ, in a hidden alcove, was a dormitory. Narrow beds, lined in rows, as if the children never left. Each bed had a name scratched into frame, and at the end, one read, Michael R. I staggered back. That was my name, my real one. One I hadn't used since I was a child in the foster system. How did they know? How did this place know? Then I heard the laughter. Soft. Behind me, I turned and saw a child standing at the loft's edge. Pale, hollow-eyed. He opened his mouth, and in my voice he said, You sang with us once. Come sing again. Then he stepped off the ledge. I lunged forward, but he was gone. Nothing but the faint echo of a chorus below, rising again. I didn't run. I should have. But some twisted part of me needed to know what this place wanted, needed to remember. Back downstairs, the chairs in the nave were no longer empty. They were filled. Shadowy figures sat motionless, heads bowed, silent, until I stepped onto the altar. Then, in unison, they raised their heads. Eyes hollow, mouths agape. No faces, just dark void where features should be. And from that silence came a sound. The Mass, but it wasn't in Latin, or English, or anything human. It was wrong. The words cracked the air like bone. The walls trembled with each syllable. The stone cross above the altar split down the center, and from the crack, black fluid dripped. I screamed. I don't even remember doing it, but something else did. A voice not mine echoed from my throat. I offered this vessel. I dropped to my knees. My body burned, like something was tearing its way out of me. Then a figure emerged from the sacristy, clad in rotted vestments, skin like papyrus. The old priest, the one from the story, the one they said burned to death. He walked with bones cracking and placed a crown of ash on my head. You sang the first hymn. You must now finish the Massachusetts. At his gesture, the shadowy congregation stood. The pews groaned beneath them. The stained glass bled down the walls. He handed me a hymnal, ink still wet, letters crawling like insects. I couldn't read it. My eyes bled trying, but my mouth sang anyway. My lips moved against my will. The ancient, forgotten hymn of the damned poured out. With each word, I saw flashes. Children locked in cells beneath the church. Priests branding symbols into stone. Fires that consumed bodies, but not souls. I wasn't just seeing it. I was remembering it, as if I'd been here before. When the final note rang out, everything stopped. The shadows vanished. The old priest turned to ash, and a voice, pure young, spoke from the rafters. You freed us. The choir of children appeared again, dozens of them, transparent, smiling faintly. One stepped forward. It was John, younger. Oh, It needed a final verse. It needed you to finish the story. Now it sleeps. They faded. The church fell silent. For the first time in decades, I stumbled outside. Dawn was rising. The birds were singing. And behind me, St. Luke stood still, quiet, as if it had never been anything but stone and wood. But I knew better. Weeks passed. I didn't speak of what happened. Not to John, not to the press, not even to myself. St. Luke's was declared historically unsafe and sealed. They posted signs, erected fences, but I knew it wasn't to keep people out. It was to keep something in. Still, I couldn't rest. Every night, I'd hear them in my dreams. The choir, not screaming, not crying, just singing low, constant, like a lullaby in reverse. And then came the whisper, "You opened it. You can close it." So I went back, one last time, armed with what I hadn't had before, knowledge, history, the truth. There was a room in the church basement sealed decades ago, the original crypt. According to records I found in the diocese, that's where the church founders performed rituals, sacrifices under the guise of salvation. The Mass was their tool, the choir their bait. I broke in through the old confessional. It had a hatch, cleverly disguised beneath torn carpeting. Below, it was colder than death. The crypt was lined with statues, angels, each with their wings broken, mouths covered in chains. At the center stood an altar of bone, and on it, a final hymnal. This one didn't sing. It breathed. It pulsed with every step I took closer. On its cover was a name I hadn't heard in decades, not since foster care. Michael R. Roanoke. Not just mine, my birth name, one only the state should have known. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. The choir had followed. Children emerged from the shadows, not spirits, not ghosts. Echoes, living fragments trapped in an unholy refrain. One by one, they circled the altar. "Sing it backward," said one. "Sing it whole," said another. "Sing it until we sleep." I opened the book. There were no notes, just names, hundreds of them, each one someone who'd been lost in this church, sacrificed, forgotten. At the bottom of the final page, "Michael, your verse in this." I didn't know the melody, but my voice did. I began to sing, and with every word, the crypt cracked. The statues wept black. The names glowed and vanished, one by one. The children began to lie down, like curling up for sleep. Their mouths smiled, peaceful. At the last note, the book burned in my hands. The flames didn't hurt. They cleansed, and the church sighed. I emerged into the night. The stars looked cleaner. Behind me, the hill where St. Luke stood was empty. Nothing but wild grass and one broken cross. The building was gone, as if it had never been there at all. But I know it was. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear them. A final note, a soft refrain. Amen. I tried to go back. Weeks after the crypt collapsed, I returned to that hill, just to see if maybe by some cruel twist, it was all still there. But there was nothing. No ruins. No altar. No record that St. Luke's Church had ever stood there. Even the locals I once spoke to claim they'd never heard of it. I searched city records again. Historical registries. Diocesan archives. Everything was gone. Redacted. As if someone or something had erased it completely. Except for one item. Inside my home, tucked between the pages of an old childhood Bible I hadn't opened in years, was a single black feather, charred, frayed at the edge, and beneath it, in that same strange ink from the hymnal, a line. Your voice ended our song, but the silence is not empty. I moved across the country, changed my name again. I no longer teach. I don't write, but I listen, every day, to silence, because sometimes, just beyond it, I hear it, a hum, a note, faint, fragile. And one night, I realized the truth. The Mass was never a curse. It was a cycle, something ancient, older than religion, used the trappings of faith to replicate itself through sound, through memory, through story, And by finishing the Mass, I pass it along. It's why I'm telling you now, because if you've listened this far, if your minds I saw the children in the pews, if your breath caught when the cross split, then maybe the melody has found you. Maybe your verse is next. And when the shadows gather in your hallway, when the radio crackles at 3:33 a.m., when you hear a child's choir where there should be none, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember the song, and you'll sing